Today we've got your full in-depth review of the brand new Garmin Forerunner 965 multisport watch. I've been putting it through its paces and swim, bike, run, all the kind of triathlon goodness you would expect to see how well it holds up to daily pounding, and then what's also changed compared to the existing Forerunner 955 that's less than a year old. So to that end, I'm going to first start off with all the newness between the 955 and the 965. Then I'm going to talk about some of the core features on the 965 and then dive into how it works on a workout, day-to-day activities, before we round into GPS accuracy, heart rate accuracy, and of course battery life. Given this is an AMOLED display, it does burn through battery a bit more than the average Bear, or at least the average Forerunner 955 did. So with that, let's dive into the 10 new things on the 965 compared to the 955. And the very first one is that AMOLED display. An AMOLED display simply means it's a display that has much more brilliance and color to it, and you see it looks just a heck of a lot more pretty than the 955 display. In this case, the display is a 1.4-inch display compared to the previous 1.3-inch display, and with that they've increased the resolution by almost 4x, so quite substantially, as you can see there, based on pixel math, because you multiply those things out and it gets quite a bit bigger. Next, despite this larger display, the case size is actually the same 47mm case. In fact, it's actually a tiny bit thinner, drops down about 1.2 millimeters thinner, but it is a tiny bit heavier because you do see that titanium bezel being added to the outside. Previously, it was just kind of this plastic look to it. Now it has a titanium bezel on the outside. There's still some plastic components on the rest of the case. Now, it's not just hardware changes here, it's also some software changes. They've added a new feature called chronic training load, basically a way to track your training load over longer periods of time, up to about 28 days. And then with that, they've added a new feature called training load ratio. And it simply takes your acute load, basically the short-term load, and compares it to your chronic load, your 28-day load. And I'll get into more of that in just a second. And don't worry, those features are also coming to the Forerunner 955 in a firmware update here next quarter, so you won't be missing out on those as well. Next, they've added wrist-based running dynamics. Now, you may have had an update to your watch in the last few months if you had a recent Garmin watch, adding wrist-based running power, but did not have the running dynamics, things like vertical oscillation, ground contact time, a bunch of kind of geeky things that, quite frankly, most people don't know what to do with. But in any case, now you no longer need a heart rate strap or a running pod. You can do that directly from the wrist itself. And that too is also coming to the 955 in a firmware update next quarter. Next, the 965 participates in what Garmin calls Unified Training Status, which is a really fancy term for Physio True-Up 2.0. Basically a way so that if you have multiple Garmin watches, almost everything now properly syncs in pretty much instantly back and forth between those watches. I'm going to do a separate video on that down the road here, but I'll talk about a little bit more of that later on as well. And then with this new AMOLED display, they've also gone ahead and revamped the entire user interface. It looks kind of like the Garmin Epix series, but not quite. It just looks a little more refined than that, which is probably a good thing, but it is way better than the existing 955 interface. Just looks like more 2023, I guess. Speaking of 2023, they finally added a USB-C charging cable, at least the side you plug into your computer or the wall or whatever the heck that is. The other side is still the existing Garmin connector, the existing Garmin charging connector you've had on most of the other watches out there, but now at least the part that comes in the box is USB-C as opposed to USB-A. Which then gets the question is, what is the price for this thing? And it's actually not that bad. So the existing Forerunner 955, for context, was $499, and the Solar Edition was $599. This new AMOLED edition is also $599. So you can basically choose which variant you want. And for the short term anyways, Garmin says that they should see basically those two watches remain kind of the same when it comes to software features, and that's currently going to be the case by next quarter. So longer term, they're not ready to commit to that. I mean, if you talk like, 2 years down the road, it's likely the 965 might get features 2 years from now that the 955 doesn't get. But at least for the short term, they should stay pretty much the same. Speaking of things to be aware of, if you are finding this video interesting or useful, if you can just whack that like button at the bottom there or hit subscribe, it really does help with this video and the channel quite a bit. So let me just briefly then run through what's not changed, just so we kind of level set things before we start getting into the watch. First off, it still has music like before, so Spotify, Amazon Music, MP3s, Deezer, you can offline music, all of that onto your watch, go out without a phone and listen to music using earphones. There is no like meaningful speaker on this. It has a beeper, but it doesn't have a speaker for music. So you do need to have some sort of Bluetooth audio device. It still has multi-band GPS, so-called dual frequency GPS. And not to like skip over my GPS section later on, it's still just as good as it was a year ago, which is pretty much industry leading. By pretty much, I mean it's definitely industry leading. It still has full downloadable topo active maps in it, so you still got that. Still has daily activity tracking and sleep tracking. Has still structured workout support, so you can create those on Garmin Connect or on Training training peaks, so whatever the heck you want, and it goes right to the watch itself. It does not have ECG, so despite Garmin rolling out ECG support to the Venu 2 Plus about 3 or 4 weeks ago, this watch does not have that hardware. So it's not ever going to be something that shows up on this watch. So just keep that in mind if that's something that means something to you. It also doesn't have any sort of voice or LTE functionality or any other things that you may have seen in other Garmin watches. This is really just a display update of the 955 with a few other software things tossed in there. It does have wrist-based running power like I talked about earlier, and it does have training readiness like I talked about as well. Speaking of training readiness, by the way, this watch over here is actually the Forerunner 265, also announced today, and it got training readiness and a bunch of other things, so check out that review up in the corner somewhere there as well. Now, in terms of like daily usage, the first thing to know, given that it is an AMOLED display watch, is by default, the display is off. And then when you raise your wrist up like this, the display turns on. However, you can also go into always on mode. And in that mode, basically the display is on all the time. I put my wrist down like this, it'll be a bit more dim, and I raise it up and it's full brightness. And that's the mode I've been using primarily, and the mode I'll dive into all the battery stats on later on in the review after the accuracy section. To start off your day though, you're gonna get the morning report. This rolled out on the 955 last year and just looks a heck of a lot nicer on the 965. For example, just a tiny little nuance to this. The other day, it was super foggy back here when I started my morning run, woke up and everything. It showed my morning report, showed the fog through the trees on the screen there. And of course, it didn't know I'm like in a treed area and everything, but just those little touches that shows that first screen being a foggy screen on a foggy day and it being a sunny screen on a sunny time of the day. It's super cool. From there, you dive down into that and it shows you kind of your stats for the day. Your sleep stats, your training readiness stats, any calendar, any structured workouts, kind of like a way to start your day. It's become one of the most popular features on Garmin watches over the last 8 or so months, and you see it carried through here with a bunch of little kind of tweaks to make it just a little bit nicer. Now, once you've cleared out of the morning report, you're back to your core watch face. You can customize this watch face as you see fit using the stock watch faces that are on there, customizing the data bits that are on that, or downloading ones from Connect IQ. One minor downside, actually it's slightly more minor to me personally, is that you can't see like training readiness numbers or training load numbers on any of the watch faces today. You can do like Connect IQ ones, I can pull that in, but not the Garmin ones, which is really weird because the 955 had that, the 735 had that. Like, that's been a core thing. Hopefully that's something that Garmin will add in a really minor update down the road. The good news though is you can still see those numbers by just simply tapping once down to the widget glances. The widget glances allow you to see glances of information about different categories, and then from there you can dive into them and get more depth about that particular category. So for example, I could look at HRV status, I can see that kind of core status right there, dive into it and look at all the stats for last night and for the last few weeks, the last month, all that goodness is right there. And the same is true for every other metric, whether it be calories or steps or sleep or altitude acclimation, all that kind of stuff is in widget glances, and even third-party apps as well. None of that has changed since the 955. It just looks a lot prettier because it's, again, the AMOLED display with far more colors and far more pixels to work with. Now, one of the features that became really popular last year when Garmin introduced it with the 955 is training readiness. And the idea with training readiness is that it basically takes an entire umbrella approach to things like sleep and stress and training load and pulls it all together and tries to figure out your basically readiness score to train, hence training readiness. Are you ready to train at that exact moment in time? Your score will increase over the course of the day if you just sat around watching TV, and it'll decrease if you're in a stressful situation or working out. Then of course that score will go down because you've done a workout and now you're less ready to train than you were an hour or 2 hours ago. It has become one of my favorite features because it just does a much better job than training status did in the past. Training status was kind of good for figuring out, are you doing the right types of training to get faster, but it wasn't good at figuring out whether or not you should train. So it would often fail, for example, in a training camp situation because it just didn't understand that, versus training readiness understands that. Now with this, the 965 adds a new feature called chronic training load. Previously in the past, they had acute training load. And acute training load is basically your last 7 days of training, but weighted more heavily towards today. So for example, this morning I went out and did a couple-hour ride, and I had a 20 or so minute run after that, and then I did a swim. In that case, that is more impactful than the ride I did a week ago. Thus, it's weighted more heavily than, again, the ride I did a week ago. So what's the difference between that and chronic training load? Well, chronic training load is that same 7-day time slice, but repeated for the past 4 weeks or 28 days. So it's basically showing you at a very high level, there's some weighting going on here as well, your kind of average acute load over the past 4 weeks. which then gets a training load ratio. Just takes those two numbers and divides it by each other to give you a score. If both of those numbers are exactly the same, you would get 1.0. If my load is higher, you would get 1.1, 1.2, etc. That green zone you see right there is from 0.8 to 1.5. So it's a little bit kind of skewed and on the higher end, if you will. Also, there's some weird rounding here. So for example, yesterday you see my score shows 1.0. If I did the math on that, it would actually be 1.09 as opposed, so I would have thought it'd be 1.1, but that's not the way Garmin rounds. Point being, it's 1.0. Today, after my ride, run, swim, it's now 1.2. I'm still within the green zone there, comfortably in the green zone, but you can see that little arrow at the top there, the gauge meter, is now more towards the right than the left. And again, the right side of that green zone is 1.5, and that's across the board for everyone because again, it's measuring your acute load versus your chronic training load. This is a nice feature, but I wouldn't really consider it like a game changer feature. It's just like, okay, just makes the mental math a little bit easier than it was in the past when you had the 4-week load focused. Just again, a really quick glanceable thing as opposed to doing all that math yourself. Now, all of this is synced using the new unified training status, which again, just another name for Physio True-Up. And the idea for Physio True-Up in the past is if you had multiple Garmin devices, it would consolidate those together. For example, if you had an Edge bike computer and a Garmin watch, it would pull that data together. But there was some kind of weird little quirks and gaps where things would keep track of stuff differently. And unified training status aims to fix that. And in my testing, it definitely does that. As I said though earlier, I probably need an entire separate video on that. There's a lot of crazy nuances, both cool and some little quirks to that. And so stay tuned for that probably in the next week or so. So let me just show you what happens when you start a sport. So you press this upper right hand button, you get this giant sport list. Here is on the screen right now, every single sport mode on the 955. There are some minor nuance differences between this and the Fenix 7 and Epix series in sports. For example, like I think there's no wakeboarding and stuff like that on the 955, where that does exist on the Fenix 7 and Epix. Never quite understood those little quirks since that's also down on the Instinct 2 series, but that's just kind of Garmin sport quirks for you. In any case, once you choose your sport, you can see that wholly new UI interface there. You can pair sensors if you had that. You can load up a structured training plan or a course, a route to follow. Again, there is full maps on this device, so you'll see those maps there during your workout. And then you just simply hit the start button. After that, you're off to the races doing whatever activity is that you're doing. In this case, you can see a couple different screens I took over the last little while. Now, one of the benefits of that high resolution display is you'll get more map data on it. This was true on the Epix compared to the Fenix a year ago, and it's true here too. Check out this picture I took yesterday showing the same 300-meter zoom level on all three watches. So Forerunner 955, Forerunner 965, and Epix. And you can see on the 955 at the 300-meter zoom level, there's virtually nothing showing there except a single road. But once I go down to the 200-meter level, then you see everything like you would have seen at the higher zoom level on the 965 and Epix. It's just a tiny little thing, allows you to see much more detail than you would have at higher zoom levels. Now, once you're done with your workout, you'll see all that information both on the watch itself and a bunch of data pages you can go scroll through that look really nice and pretty now, as well as also on the Garmin Connect mobile app. You can see a bunch of examples right now on the screen of data in the app. And of course, all that data, like before, is synced off to platforms like Strava and Training Peaks and whatever else you've configured and authorized. None of that really changes. It's all pretty much the same here as well. And thus, this is a great time to dive into the accuracy of both the GPS and the heart rate side. And for that, we'll jump over to the computer.
So starting off a bit of a steady state run here, you can see it's virtually identical to the chest strap. Only thing slightly different here is actually the whoop strap, but the Forerunner 965 and 265 are the same. Just like they are virtually the same and identical here on this tempo run. Again, it's pretty much spot on. There's really no complaints. As I go into an indoor trainer ride via 2 max intervals here, and it's perfect. I mean, it's literally like perfect. There's really no complaints at all there. Going out into a road ride, a couple hour road ride outside, a couple tiny wobbles, but again, this is really quite normal for optical sensors, and this is a very good example of a very good set. Now, all good things eventually do come to a bit of an end, and we see this here with the 965 really struggling in these super hard running intervals. These are 400-meter intervals followed by 200-meter intervals, and for whatever reason, just a little bit late on the 400s and kind of missing some of the 200s, yet the 265 just nailed this across the board. Like every single one was pretty solid, tiny bit of latency, but again, not too much of an issue. Now, looking at some GPS accuracy here, starting off in the jungle of forest, you can see right away that this is pretty darn close. They're all within a couple meters of each other, despite dense tree cover and even actually dense fog as well, and using the default SAT-IQ settings, so none of the higher multiband stuff unless it needs it. Going out of this suburbia here, it's on the sidewalk, like we're literally on the sidewalk. And again, if you look at a higher level view around the neighborhood, no problem at all. Going on to a road ride, this is back and forth and back and forth and back and forth a bunch of times on the stretch, and what's really interesting is if you look at the actual track on the roads, if I zoom way down in there, you can see both sides are on the correct side, meaning as I go north, it's on the correct side of the road, and south on the other correct side of the road. This is a small beach road. Even this little turnaround there, just look at the car size for context. I'm within one car width, despite going around this thing a gazillion times, and it's spot on. So what about the running dynamics using wrist-based as opposed to the chest strap? Here you can see it's very similar in the kind of grand scheme of things, except when I started walking. Those two like double spikes you see there. Each time I walked, whether it be for ground contact time or vertical ratio, vertical oscillation, it sort of like separated from the chest strap. Again, I'm not really sure what you're gonna do with this data. There's still like no clarity from Garmin even all these years later, but hey, you can probably get away with using just the wrist side as opposed to an external sensor if you need that data.
So finally, what about battery? When you talk AMOLED displays, the biggest concern is battery life. And you probably think like, oh, it'll be a day or something like that, like AMOLED displays from other units, but that's not the case in the Garmin realm. Now, typically speaking, Garmin publishes their battery life claims based on gesture mode, which means it's off, raise it up, it turns it on, right? But in some watches, they also publish the always-on mode. In this case, they don't. Generally speaking, though, always-on mode times are about half of the regular times. And so I've been using an always-on mode. And in my case, the battery burn has been not good. It's been really bad, and so bad in fact that Garmin basically sent me out another watch because that watch is burning 3 times faster than even their worst estimates are. So I've got the new watch just this morning, so it's still a bit early days to figure out whether or not that resolves my battery issues. For context though, my friend and fellow reviewer Desfit on his 965 is seeing like 6.5 to 7 days, which is where you should be, and that's with full multi-band GPS configuration, it's with 6 hours of outdoors, it's with always on, and so he's seeing what you should be seeing. So I'm hoping it's just my particular unit was bum, and then this new unit will resolve that. I'll leave a comment down the bottom there somewhere and update my written view as well once I've got a few more days on that data, but that would put it in the ballpark of what I saw on the Epix, which is the same general concept from Garmin, being like 4 to 5-ish days or so, and there's a lot more efficiencies now in this latest hardware compared to a year ago. I'm pretty confident, and Garmin seems pretty confident it was something wrong with that particular unit. Assuming this replacement unit resolves the issues I saw, I'll be pretty happy with it. I've been mostly rocking the Forerunner 955 and the Epix over the past, like year or so, and I like the size of the Forerunner 955, but I really like the display of the Epix. So this kind of combines those two things into exactly what I want in a watch, which is a relatively lightweight watch with a really pretty display. And that probably explains why Garmin made the 965 to begin with. It is a safe bet of a product launch. They take a proven watch, the 955, they take a proven AMOLED display technology, they stick the two together, and they call it macaroni. There's no new features here. They didn't add LTE, they didn't add ECG, they didn't add wireless charging, they didn't add all the other hardware capabilities they've introduced over the past year. None of them are here except for that AMOLED display, which they've again had for now a couple years. And I think that's okay. The price point is reasonable, and ultimately it's what people have been asking for. Now, if you are considering this watch, I will have shortly posted my full 965 user interface, beginner guide, whatever the heck you want to call it. Typically they're about 35 to 45 minutes in length, and I walk through every single feature step by step, showing like real world data on there. Again, all the data from my recent activities and how it all works together with a whole bunch of pro tips and whatever the case is. You should find that on the screen here very shortly. With that, again, thanks for watching. If you found this video interesting and useful, you know what to do. Whack the like button, hit subscribe, the ding dong bell, all the things. Have a good one.